This guitar is 100% 3D printed. Even the string is made out of a length of 3D printer filament. But this is just one of many instruments I ended up designing and printing, like this tunable drum here with a fully 3D printed drum head, or this contraption that, well, I'll let you try and guess what this thing does. But I had to make all of these instruments and more for a challenge I decided to give myself: to write and record a hit song using only 100% 3D printed instruments. If I do this correctly, the song at the end of this video should hold up to any top 40 song you hear on the radio today. But ultimately, I want you guys to be the judge. So here are the 3 rules for the challenge. 1. No sound other than my voice singing the lyrics can originate from anything other than a 3D printed instrument. 2. All instruments must be 100% 3D printed, meaning no extra hardware, screws, guitar strings, drum heads, glue, nothing but 3D printer filament. 3. I can use basic built-in software effects such as reverb, EQ, compression, distortion, tuning, etc. to dial in the tones. So with the rules all laid out, I said goodbye to my remaining instruments that I've grown so comfortable with and replaced them with my 3D printer along with a range of filaments. To record the audio, I've got my condenser microphone here, and I've got this $8 contact microphone, which basically just picks up the vibrations of whatever it's touching. So the first instrument I decided to design was this really stripped down version of a guitar that you saw in the intro. Sporting some unextruded nylon filament for the string, a 3D printed worm gear mechanism for the tuner, and a modular construction that would allow me to alter the tone slightly by swapping out lengths of neck sections and bridge configurations. Now, many of you might be thinking, why didn't you just go to a site like Thingiverse or MakerWorld and download a pre-existing model of a guitar? Well, when I started this challenge, I thought I was going to be able to do exactly that. However, when I looked closer, I realized most of the instruments on these websites required some additional parts to actually function. This guitar, for example, requires real guitar strings and a metal bridge and tuners and screws to fasten all these parts together. Now, there are a bunch of other instruments like these flutes or recorders that do seem to be 100% 3D printed, and I did bookmark a few to print later. But when it comes to laying down an initial bass line, which is how I want to start this song, wind instruments just don't have the right sound in my opinion. And that's why I designed this guy from scratch, and honestly, I'm glad I did because I learned a ton. I modeled it vaguely after an acoustic guitar, but I obviously had to make some executive decisions, like deciding to go with a single string instrument instead of 6. See, a standard guitar has 6 strings of varying thicknesses, so it can achieve a much higher range of notes on a single neck, and allows a player to strum chords containing multiple notes at the same time, both of which are huge benefits when you want to make an instrument as versatile as a standard guitar. But for my case, I'm not aiming for versatility per se, as there's a ton I can get away with in the studio, which you'll see throughout the video. Additionally, I was very limited by the materials I was forced to use in this challenge. Since I only have one size of printer filament to use, it didn't make much sense for me to make a stringed instrument with more than one string. The second thing you'll probably notice is the overall size of the instrument, and I was basically limited by the size of my printer and how much filament I wanted to use. I knew I was going to have to make a design that could be printed in parts and assembled like a puzzle after the fact, but first I need to get a baseline of how big I wanted the final design to be, and the main factor for determining this was my string length. So I took my nylon filament, which I decided to use purely based on the fact that some acoustic guitars already use nylon strings, and stretched it over a bin and gave it a pluck. This test, while rudimentary, revealed some good data. For one, I discovered that the tighter I could get the string, the better the tone of the note would be, but also the higher the note would become. Since I was aiming for a bass sound, I wanted the lowest note possible while still achieving a decent tone. And this is where I discovered by stretching the filament over the longer side of the bin at a similar tension to my previous test, I was able to achieve a lower note with the same tone quality. So basically, the longer the string length, the lower the note I can get, and this resulted in me deciding to make the guitar modular enough that I could add sections of this neck piece, theoretically indefinitely, until I achieved the low note I wanted. However, in practice, I was limited by the flexibility of this neck design, and ultimately it maxed out at 2 neck pieces before the instrument became too unstable to play reliably. The bow on this is just ridiculous. Just a wee bit too long. Luckily, I think there are some studio tricks I can use to make this work for my bass tone still. So I've got my modular guitar set up in bass mode with this extra neck piece and the contact mic in the bridge clamp. Let's record some bass lines. So playing this instrument is a bit of a challenge as it is fretless, but the neck itself is rather flexible as well, so it goes out of tune if you bend it while playing. Also, the nylon filament string does stretch a bit over time, so it does go out of tune eventually after playing it a bit. Luckily, I was able to go in and tune and quantize the notes after the fact, which is something I would have liked to avoid, as tuning can apply some weird artifacts to the tone, but I think it worked fine here. So here's the raw sound of the bass line I played after some minor tuning and quantizing. Sounds okay, but not very bassy. So I went in and added a few audio effects, starting with a compressor to bring the volume up to a more consistent level, and then I used a vocal transformer to pitch the whole thing down an octave. Finally applying some EQ to reduce some of that nasty string noise and some distortion for attitude, a tremolo to tighten up the rhythm a bit, and a bass amp for a more bass guitar-like vibe. And we get a bass line that sounds like this. And throughout this whole production process, I will likely come back to these effects and change settings probably like a million times before I'm actually done the song. But for now, I'm happy with this. So let's move on to some drums. Starting with the kick drum. Much like the guitar, I modeled this vaguely off of a modern drum with a main shell, a rim, and a separate skin. But again, my material constraints forced me to make some major changes. Where a regular drum uses a rim that can pull a skin tight using some screws that I attach to the shell of the drum via these lugs, I knew right off the bat I was going to have to figure out a different way of tensioning my drum skin because I didn't think 3D printed screws would be strong enough to handle the forces. I started thinking I could just recreate a modern drum with massive 3D printed screws to tighten the skin down, but as I brainstormed further down this road, it ultimately led to the idea of just making the drum itself one ginormous screw. Now, I don't know if this was a good idea in the end, but it was a really unique design challenge because I had to take into account the fact that the shell needed to be hollow and the skin of the drum needed to be attached to the rim in a way that would allow the skin to be tightened without it rotating along with the rim as the rim is screwed onto the shell. The rim has the female threads to interface with the shell, but above that I have this groove that has a backward chamfer on it to grab onto the complementary structural rim I included on the skin design. The shell has the male thread on the outer edge, and I inset the bearing edge of the shell, which is the part of the drum that the skin gets stretched over, inward slightly to allow the skin to stretch down into the body of the drum. Now the skin was extra fun for me because it was the first time I was going to be using flexible TPU filament. I had a feeling flexible filament would be ideal here, especially for the bass drum, because like the guitar string, the tighter the tension, the higher the note. And with a flexible skin, my hunch was that I'd be able to achieve a much lower tension overall than a skin printed out of a more rigid material like PLA or ABS. Now, I can show you the difference between a TPU skin and a PLA skin in a minute here, but because the flexible filament meant it would lack the rigidity necessary to hold onto the groove I put inside of the rim, I had to attempt another thing for the first time ever: multi-material printing. This is where 3D printing gets really impressive because you can combine different materials with different properties in one print to achieve otherwise impossible parts. Modern printers these days include features like multi-material support or even tool changers to make this easier, but I don't have a printer set up for this, so I had to do it the old-fashioned way by pausing the print after printing the initial flexible filament layers for the actual skin, replacing the soft TPU filament with PLA, and then resuming the print where it printed this small rim of hard plastic right on top of the flexible material. With the settings dialed in properly to allow the two materials to fuse together, I ended up with this.
Oh yeah. Okay, let's see.
Oh, quite nice. Ooh, I think that'll do. So we've got a nice rigid PLA rim on this, a soft TPU skin, and so that should lock in with the body of the drum, hopefully, the rim. And once inserted in the groove of the rim, I was able to thread... Okay, I actually made a mistake here when designing for 3D printing. It's always good practice to leave some tolerance between parts that are meant to fit together, and while I used to do this every time, the new printer I have now has been so accurate that I've started modeling things without adding any tolerance. So I did try filing it down a bit, but then I decided to just print another rim and shell piece, this time adding in more tolerance than was required because why waste the original rim and shell I already printed? With the new ones printed, I could simply take my original rim and pair it with the new shell with the added tolerance and vice versa. And now I have two of these drums with functioning tightening mechanisms. It's still kind of hard to turn, but I think it's good enough for what I want to do here. Additionally, with this extra drum, I was able to print a skin made entirely out of PLA. And this is where you can really hear the difference between using a soft skin versus a hard one. I also took advantage of this by printing a joining shell body that I could attach both drums to, and now I have a single drum with two skins that more resembles a modern drum and should let me play around with different tunings of either skin to get much wider range of drum tones. So I think it's time to record some kick drum. Now for the snare drum, I did a bunch of experimenting because snare drums are one of those things in a song that can vary so dramatically. And it's not so much about finding a snare tone that sounds good on its own, it's more about finding the sound that suits the song the best. A regular snare drum uses these metal wires stretched across the bottom skin of the drum that, when the drum is struck, the vibration travels through the drum, causing the snare wires to vibrate against the bottom skin, which is usually tightened very tightly. And the resulting interaction between snare wires and the skin results in this sizzly, high-frequency, high-attack sound that us drummers absolutely love. I attempted to recreate this first by filling the drum with some random filament scraps I had to see if that would create a similar snare sizzle, but that was a fail. Not great. I then tried pressing some unextruded filament against the skin, but that didn't work either. Also bad. I was about to give up when I decided to try and print my own snare wires in the form of this thin grid thing. And again, that kind of failed. Thought that one was gonna work. I think my main issue is if I really wanted this to work like a standard snare drum, I would probably have to tighten this grid against the bottom skin in some way, but I really didn't want to have to reprint a whole new drum that could accommodate this. But in a desperate frenzy of experimentation, I discovered this. So if I only use the PLA side of the drum and just place the grid over top of the skin and hit it, sounds kind of good. Now, will this be the perfect snare sound for the song? I'm not sure yet, but let's track it in now and we can see how it feels when the rest of the song comes together. Now this one drum ended up being versatile enough to create a few different tom samples as well. But at this point in the challenge, I started to really feel like the song was going to need some extra magic. Something that felt more human because up until this point, the drums were just single samples that I had placed along a grid. And while this is how most pop music is made these days, I wanted to actually play some of the drum fills because I'm a drummer after all. But the kind of fills I wanted to do would be impossible on one single drum. I also wanted more of a piercing tone for these fills, something closer to a set of roto toms that you'd typically find in most marching bands. So I made these. These are tiny little roto toms I made, and they are as simple as a cylinder with a top skin all printed out of PLA. I made this basic mount that uses these clips to attach it to my desk so I could play these guys with two drumsticks. I printed these drumsticks too, by the way. Now, most fills tend to end with a crash cymbal, which I'm sure most of you know. Crash cymbals are just big discs of metal, and I only have plastic, so that was something that really stumped me for a while. I decided to analyze what a crash cymbal's purpose really was in a song, and basically came to the conclusion that it's just a really high frequency hit with an equally high frequency tail that eventually falls off. I had all of these plans to create a two-part crash cymbal out of plastic that would comprise of an initial hit using a thin sheet of printed PLA, and then I'd create the tail by designing my own version of a 3D printed rain stick with a bunch of little PLA bits inside of it. But after printing the main sheet of PLA and recording it, I wasn't happy with the tone. There was just no way to get that high frequency sound I wanted, so I tried tuning it up a ton, and that got closer, and then I decided to just try and stretch this audio sample out a bunch, making sure to add a fade so it falls off just like a regular crash cymbal, and it sounded kind of decent. I think in the mix you really won't be able to tell this isn't an actual crash cymbal. Now, this discovery saved me a ton of time by allowing me to skip the design and printing of the rain stick thing I was talking about, but it does sort of feel like cheating a bit to me. This challenge is kind of weird that way because theoretically with enough post-processing, you can really change any original sound into whatever other sound you want. So let me know, is this cymbal solution a bit of a cop-out? Anyways, let's move on. At this point, I was off to the races. I had a decent bed track laid down, so I decided to bring the guitar out in guitar form with the single neck piece and recorded some guitar parts. And I used the cymbal sample chopped into tiny little sections to make some hi-hat samples as well. Now we've got the form of the song down, and I want to add some lead melodic tones into the mix. The first instrument I decided to print for this was this space flute by Universal Maker that I found on MakerWorld. I gotta tell you, it was really nice to be able to just find a file and hit print instead of designing something from scratch, and this works really well, except for the fact that it isn't in the right key for the song. I did try to find a wind instrument that was designed in the key of F major, which is the key of the song, but I couldn't find a file that worked. Now, I could have tried scaling this model up or down, or changing the hole sizes or locations of the holes until it was in the right key, but I knew this would require a ton of trial and error, and my filament reserves were quickly dwindling. So I decided to do the next best thing and just pitch up my song to the key of the recorder, track my lead line, and then pitch the whole thing back down to the original key, and this worked very well.
Good enough. I could work with that.
With some tweaking of the tones and some clever editing, because I suck at playing the recorder,
God damn it. Oh my god.
I took it from this to this. But I wanted even more lead tones, so I printed this funny looking thing, which uses the same clamping mechanism as my tom holder I already made, and mounted it to my table. Now, the point of this instrument was to give me some nice plucked tones, kind of like a finger piano, but these tines were originally all the same length, and this was by design. Learning from the recorder fiasco, I didn't want to keep reprinting this thing until I had the notes right, and there are some mathematical formulas I could have tried using to dial this in more efficiently, but I thought it would be a lot easier to just print all the tines at full length and just tune each one by cutting them down to length. I was not as methodical as I would have liked during this process and ended up with a bit of a wacky layout of notes here, but they are all within the right key. So let's record another lead line for our chorus with this. And here it is with effects applied. At this point in the song, I'm feeling ready to lay down some vocals, so I think it's time to write some lyrics. Now, before half of you decide to skip this part because you're here for the engineering stuff, let me tell you that writing lyrics tickles the engineering part of my brain, unlike just about anything else. And maybe it's just the way that I approach writing lyrics, and everybody does this differently, but for me, it's this really satisfying task of gathering my materials, in this case, specific words or phrases I intend to use, and then arranging them in the most efficient way to portray the message of the song that I'm going for. And this is pretty much exactly how I approach engineering as well. Gather materials and piece by piece, assembling them, trying different techniques and methods until I work up to a final product I'm happy with. In this case, I wanted to write a song about 3D printing, and if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know I love doing this. I've recorded songs about my arbor press, with the fires of a ton, light shows, you should build a light show with a spectrum of lights, and cleaning up my workspaces. Never made much sense avoiding all these messes. But I'm going to do something a little differently for this song because I'm trying to make a hit after all. And one of the keys to writing a hit song is writing about something the general population can relate to. And in a majority of hit songs you hear on the radio today, that topic tends to be love. So if I want to write a love song, but also a song about 3D printing, I'm going to have to be a bit creative. But let's start by writing down some of the many 3D printing terms out there in hopes that it will inspire something love adjacent. Okay, so we've got filament, nozzle, hotend, Fusion 360, 3D model, CAD. This is not an exhaustive list, but I can already see how we can use these terms in the form of a love song. It's honestly going to get a bit raunchy, like bedslinger is a very 3D printer focused term, but to a general audience, this term just oozes with innuendo. Same with hotend and model even. Now, I want to be honest. The second I thought of this challenge idea, I've been brainstorming these 3D printing terms and writing the lyrics in my head. And I've got the whole song pretty much written already, but this is just one of the things I love most about songwriting. Because while I was waiting around for prints to finish, taking breaks from designing, or doing anything that didn't require 100% focus, I was able to work on this song in my head. And for the sake of transparency, I want to do something I never thought I'd ever want to do, ever. This may or may not be the recording you hear on the actual track, but it's just mostly for a demo. I used to be a bedslinger till you changed me to the Core XY. Did you ask me how I can print faster? You know it's due to my nozzle size. Okay, I think we got something in there. We'll mess around with that, but let's move on to the chorus. This is the part that matters. I don't care what we make, even if this was hey, FDM. Oh, why did I make this so high? I'm just gonna get like into it, you know? Just as long as we FDM. Let's try and do it a little manlier. Oh. I had beef dip earlier. I don't know if that's helping. Just as long as we FDM. Yeah, that's better. That's better. And it might not be cool, but I'll be bringing a spool. And it might not be cool, but I'll be bringing a spool of my favorite filament. Not bad. I'm gonna tune this. So if it's not perfect, that's okay. Perfection isn't necessary. It's called character. At this point, the song has the sonic landscape of a pop-punk song you'd hear in the early 2000s, and that's probably a result of me growing up in that era. But I want to add something that feels a little more modern. And what's more modern than some good synth tones? And I know synths have been around for a while, but I think a synth tone would really make this song pop. Basically, a synth, or synthesizer, refers to any electronic instrument that generates its tone from scratch using electric signals instead of relying on an initial recorded sample. And that electric signal can be as simple as a sine wave at a specific frequency. If you've ever heard the term A440 before, this refers to the frequency that makes an A note. And basically, if you had a synth generate a sine wave at 440 hertz, you'd get an A. There are other wave shapes though, like a triangle wave or square wave, but I want to focus on a sawtooth wave because I think we can actually create this mechanically. Basically, a sawtooth wave broken down can be compared to a single hit of an audio sample. And theoretically, if you take that audio sample and repeat it at 440 hertz, you should get a sound that resembles an A note. So how do we produce such a high frequency of repeated sounds? More gears, baby! This instrument is what I like to call a mechanical tone generator. It works by spinning this main gear, which has a 5-to-1 ratio, meaning for every one turn of the main gear, these wheels spin 5 times. These wheels have little grooves on them, and the pink wheel has a bunch of tiny grooves in it, while the blue wheel has much larger grooves. And if I take this 3D printed card and hold it against my contact microphone and then press the card against the edge of these wheels as I rotate the gear, we get tone. I included 2 wheels because I wasn't sure which would sound better, but it makes me think that a future version could make use of 12 wheels, one for each note of a scale. But I think I can work with this setup for now. Oh, and this instrument uses the same desk clamping mechanism as the finger piano and the toms, because why not? Now, this instrument is not really that playable. You can change the notes by changing the speed of rotation, but it's really hard to get a consistent speed, and you can really hear the pitch change with the inconsistency of the spin speed. So I'm basically going to record a long take of varying notes, and then I'll cut something together using that recording. This again feels a bit like cheating, but I think it was totally worth it, not only to experiment with designing gears for 3D printing, but also to introduce a more unique sound into the song. So I actually discovered a way to kind of use this thing pretty practically. Originally, I was just going to record a long take and actually chop the sample up and place them manually into some sort of part. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you right here. I'm going to record over this solo section I have, and we're gonna make a solo with this thing. So basically, I'm going to track it, and then I'll let you see what happens here. Okay, absolute chaos, right? It sounded crazy if you listen to the recording. Right, just total noise. And I was originally trying to make a single note at a time, but it was so hard to keep the speed of this consistent. And so you can hear the notes are changing all over the place. So then I thought, if I just throw a super heavy auto tune over top of that, we might get something kind of fun. So I actually went in and I put a pitch corrector here, an auto tune, and I made my root note F, and I put it to the scale of a F major pentatonic scale, which is like kind of the basic scale to solo on. Pretty much anything you play in the F major pentatonic scale is going to sound good on this song. Now, I turned down the response time to 0. So basically that means as soon as the software senses a certain note, it's going to immediately switch it to that note. If you set it to something, it's at 0 milliseconds. If you set it to something like 10 milliseconds, when it hears a note, it'll take 10 milliseconds to actually get up to that note. So in this case, it's going to pitch it super, super fast. And then the tolerance I set to like 13 cents. And so the tolerance basically just chooses when it's going to decide to switch. So the higher you have it, the less it's going to switch. And what's really cool is when you have it set to the way you like it, this thing's actually going to generate a solo like almost randomly. So let's listen to it now with this auto tune on. Still sounds crazy, but you can hear there's actually different notes there. And so I've done this already. Before I started filming this, I went in, I recorded a take, I did the auto tune, and then I actually went in and I adjusted the notes individually. I kind of heard a melody in the solo that this generated, and I changed some things just to make it sound a little more
deliberate. And I'll save that for the actual song so you can hear it in the context of the song, because here it sounds nuts, but in the actual song I think it sounds pretty cool. So yeah, that is the solo generator. I'm calling it the solo generator instead of the mechanical solo generator instead of the mechanical tone generator now. So yeah, that was fun. Let's move on. So with the final instrument tracked, I went through the arduous process of mixing, adding some studio magic here and there, cutting, stretching, and reversing audio samples to create swells and other cool little transition moments. So after weeks of work designing, printing, writing, recording, and mixing, the song is complete. I'm going to play the full song for you here in a second, but I wanted to mention a couple things quickly. First, I have opted to release the song by itself as its own standalone music video because I wanted to do a bit of an experiment. I'm curious if people listening to the song for the first time without seeing this whole explainer video first will notice anything off about the song. As I mentioned in the intro of this video, if I was successful in this challenge, people listening to this song out of context shouldn't be able to tell it was created using 100% 3D printed instruments. So I'm hoping some of you would be willing to play the song for your friends and family and let me know in the comments down below what their reactions were. Now, keep in mind, the music video does still show me playing the 3D printed instruments, so maybe don't let them see the video until they've listened to the song first, but then obviously you can show them the video after to kind of prove how it was done. I've also put the song on Spotify if that makes sharing any easier. Secondly, I know this video is a bit different than what I've made in the past, but it's honestly been the most fun I've had making a video so far, and I'd love to keep making videos around this topic. And when I started this project, I had no idea if it was going to work or not, so unfortunately I didn't film a lot of the building and designing process, but I spent the last couple of years on YouTube really figuring out what I wanted to be doing, and for the first time I feel like I found something that really ticks all the boxes for me. So if you want to see more videos like this, let me know what you'd like to see next. Should I change any of the rules up? Maybe try some specific genres or specific instruments? I definitely plan on filming more in the beginning stages if I do this type of video again, and I've got a ton of new ideas since I started this video, so if you enjoyed this, let me know in the comments. And lastly, I will be releasing all the files for every instrument I designed on all of the popular 3D printing sites, so you can print and experiment developing these instruments even further if you like. So with that said, this is the first original song recorded with 100% 3D printed instruments, layer by layer.
I used to be a bedslinger till you changed me to the Core XY. Did you ask me how I can print faster when you know it's due to my nozzle size? It's 0.8 millimeters. I brought hairspray, not that you need it. Your layers look perfect every time, but I struggle still with bed adhesion. Would you hold me down for the first few lines? I don't care what we make, even if there's mistakes, just as long as we FDM. And it might not be cool, but I'll be bringing a spool of my favorite filler. I want you to see how hard it's been keeping up with your hotend, 'cause I've been dying to know just how far we can go with FDM. Here we go. Your STLs, precision models, and my fusion files are such a mess. Let's risk a slice without a skirt on. You can PLA with my ABS. I don't have supports on 'cause I'm not overhanging, and you question my infill at 100%. I'm aiming for strength though, and it might get quite heavy. And if it works, we'll just go again. I don't care what we make, even if there's mistakes, just as long as we FDM. And it might not be cool, but I'll be bringing spool of my favorite filler. I want you to see how hard it's been keeping up with your heart. And 'cause I've been dying to know just how far we can go with FDL. Anything is possible when we go layer by layer each time. It feels like we're unstoppable. I don't care what we make, even if there's mistakes, just as long as we have DL. And it might not be cool, but I'll be bringing a spool of my favorite